Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to cover the detailed documentation of the Warner Astrology project. We've already gone over this workflow chart in the last video. Now let us discuss the goal setting and the prompt writing parts. So firstly, the goal is very vague, not at all specific. An example goal could be build a ping pong game. That's how basic a goal is. It is not an input to the model. It is rather used by the reviewer to identify what type of task you're performing. Step 2 here is to write the prompt itself. So the prompt, as you remember, should follow the task category. It should follow the particular programming language that is specified for the task. It should be clear and specific in what it is wanting the model to do, and it should reflect the difficulty level in that particular task. In this project, each and every prompt that you're writing has to be in the English language. Although we do have projects where you might be required to write prompts in other languages, similar coding prompts in other languages, you should avoid low effort prompts such as single sentence prompts or incredibly generic prompts that do not contain any constraints in them. These prompts also include any of your CP or DSA type questions. Those types of questions are not allowed. You should ask questions that are relevant to someone who is actively working in the field of computer science, maybe a DevOps engineer or a software engineer or an AI/ML expert, etc. Ask questions that they would want the AI to solve, not the CP and DSA type questions. Now, in terms of what type of questions you cannot ask, we have certain constraints on that as well. So you cannot ask the model any questions that involve counting prompts. Now, there was this meme that floated around a couple of months ago. The latest state-of-the-art models, all of the LLMs, if you ask them to count how many R's are there in strawberry, they won't be able to do that. Now, it seems fascinating that some of the models that can generate entire pieces of code or entire code libraries just from a single line of prompt are not able to answer such a simple thing that can be answered by a 2-year-old. It is because that the way that these LLMs are designed actually restricts them from keeping account of how much they have produced. Which is why, since this type of prompt is outside of the scope of improvement, that is why you cannot ask the model these types of prompts and fault them for not providing the correct answer. Secondly, you cannot ask questions about mathematics or physics. Since this is a coding related project, we've seen that sometimes people ask some really complex physics formulas and physics simulations, and it turns out that the model ends up producing a correct code, but it might have used an incorrect formula here or there. In that case, those types of tasks are not allowed because this is a coding related project. So your questions that you're asking has to be coding related. Now, next up, let us look at the task categories that we have in this project. So remember, every prompt has to follow a task category. We have certain very general and very basic task categories such as generation/synthesis. Now in this task category, all you have to do is to provide a description of what you want the model to do. And based on your requirements, the model is then expected to create that entire code from scratch on its own. All you provided the model were just some raw requirements. That type of task is called generation/synthesis. Next up, we have the second type of task, which is editing/rewriting, where you provide the model a piece of code that you have written, and it should work properly, by the way. Now you ask the model to make any changes or adjustments to that piece of code. Maybe you can ask the model to, if you provide a piece of code of a website that you have written, you can ask the model to add new features to it or edit the code in certain way or remove features from that website, etc. In any possible way, whenever you're asking the model to make any changes to your existing code that is working perfectly, in that case, that comes under editing/rewriting. If you are providing the model a piece of code that does not work, that has a bug, in that case, you can consider that type of task under code debugging. Now here, one thing to make sure is that you are providing the code to the model itself, and that code must contain a bug. You cannot provide a perfect piece of code to the model and then expect it to debug it because there will be nothing to debug. The next category that we have is called documentation. Here you provide the model with a piece of code that works perfectly, and then you ask the model to document that piece of code. Or from documentation, I mean maybe adding comments to the piece of code, documenting a particular function, creating example usages of a particular function, or commit text generation, comment generation, API documentation, etc. These types of tasks come under code documentation. Next up, we also have another category called review/critique. Now, in review/critique tasks, you provide the model with a piece of code that works perfectly. After that, you ask the model to review that piece of code and tell you certain optimizations about it, or tell you certain information about the code after analyzing the piece of code. In documentation, the model is expected to go over the code and generate text that reflects what the code actually is. That is considered as documentation. If the model also has to analyze the piece of code and then tell what exactly are certain optimizations, certain techniques, or certain areas where the code is lacking or can be improved upon, that comes under code review/critique. This could be you asking the model to identify if there are any security issues with your code, or if your code is following the best practices or not, or if your code is complying with the regulations and standards that are there, etc. It could also be that you're asking the model to, hey, what is the time complexity of my code? That is a part of review and critique. So these are the two categories that a lot of people get confused on. The last category that we have is called code ecosystem. In code ecosystem, you're asking the model to generate a piece of code, plus you're asking the model for certain instructions on how you can maybe integrate that piece of code into something, or deploy it, or do any possible thing except for writing the code itself. For example, if I ask the model to create a piece of code that could maybe automatically write an entire blog for me about data science, if I provide just this part to the model, this prompt will come under code generation. But if I also ask the model that, hey, I have a Mac OS with this particular version, I want a way to automatically schedule this code to execute every day at 9 a.m. In this case, the model is not only expected to create that entire piece of code for me, but also provide me certain instructions on how I can actually schedule this piece of code. The model might provide instructions on, hey, go to files and then go to preferences and then go to this particular option and that particular option. And along the way, the chances of the model giving you a wrong instructions is really high. This is why a lot of the times code ecosystem is possibly the easiest of all of these categories to find a deviation in. You can try with different types of IDEs or development workflows. You can ask the model for any CLI commands, like, if you have a Python program, if you want to convert it into an executable, in that case, the model will give you certain bash commands that you can run in order to convert your Python code into an executable file that you can share with other people. Other times, you can ask the model for any version control. So you can ask the model that, hey, I have this code, I want to push it to my GitHub repository. What are the commands that I need to execute? A lot of the times I've seen people Dockerize a piece of code in this particular task category. So you can do that as well. So this is all of the task categories that we have in this particular project. One very important thing to make sure here is that in review/critique, you should manage the expectations from the model. Now, what do I mean by this? So now let's say if I have a friend here called Robin. Now, if I ask Robin that, hey, what is wrong with me? In that case, all I want from Robin is to just tell me what is wrong with me. I do not want him to fix me. If he tries to fix me, that's up to him. But all I want Robin to do is to just tell me what is wrong with me, and I can work on the fixing part. Similarly, in Coding itself, when you ask the model to review a piece of code for any security issues, any optimizations, etc., all you are expecting from the model is to just tell you what exactly are the areas that the code is lacking in. If the model is fixing the code itself and providing you a corrected version of the code, that is fine, that is correct. But you cannot fault the other model for not doing it. For example, if you have two responses, let's call it response A and response B for the same prompt. Now let's say response A provided certain points to improve, and it also provided the corrected code itself, that is fine. And if response B only provides the instructions on, what are the issues with the code, this is fine too. Of course, response A can be better than response B, but this alone, not providing the code itself, is not a valid deviation. You cannot mark it as a deviation if response B does not provide you the correct code and response A does. So this is why you need to manage your expectations in the review/critique category. In this video, we have gone over the different task categories that we have here. In the next video, we will go over the difficulty levels that are there. And we will discuss what is the difference between these difficulty levels and how you can identify them.